So my talk today is called Universal Light. Have you noticed the sunsets over the last few weeks? They've been spectacular. It's one of the perks of living here in the foothills. We get these wonderful pastel sunsets at this time of year. The sunsets have quite a unique array of colors and shades, beautiful russets, ambers, salmon, and delicate pastel tones. If you haven't noticed the colors, I invite you to go outside at about 4:45 in a spot where you can look westward and notice the beautiful sky in the sunset. It is a seasonal, rare opportunity to see this particular quality of light in the sky. It reminds me of my favorite French artist, Monet. He's well known for his impressionistic style. I had the pleasure and the privilege of seeing his paintings at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. One of his most famous works is a series of paintings depicting the Cathedral of Rouen, which he painted in 4 different lights: in the early morning, at midday, the afternoon, and in the evening. So basically it's the same scene of the end wall of the cathedral with the big cathedral door and rose window. And he painted it in 4 different lights to express the character of that building. And each painting had its own unique appearance, even though it was the same door, the same window, the same wall, all because of the quality of the light at that particular time. And did you know that Monet spent 40 years teaching himself how to see things differently? He loved the play of light, especially the light at dawn and at twilight, and the unique feel that it gave to reality. And he felt that people weren't observant enough with regard to the quality of that light and how it changed things. And he was so enamored of the light at sunrise and sunset that he became determined to depict its uniqueness in his paintings in order to bring it to people's attention. Another famous painting of his is that of the wisteria and the bridge at Giverny, in which he says he couldn't distinguish between the wisteria and the bridge. They flowed into each other. Did you also know that Monet developed cataracts as he aged, which caused the light to become diffuse for him and to be seen as blurry patterns, which might explain why the bridge and the wisteria flowed into each other. More and more, he started painting what he was seeing through his cataracts, and it had a tremendous influence on his painting, and indeed on the art world in general, developing that new style of Impressionism. The doctors urged him to have surgery to get rid of the cataracts, but he refused, saying, "I have worked too hard to see this way." Now, if I was to show you the image of the painting of the wisteria and the bridge, would you now look at it differently? Why? Because you now have a new piece of information that caused you to see it differently. You realize that the artist's cataracts, a medical condition, influenced how he was seeing things, and then accordingly how he painted. The new info caused you to have new brain circuits, overriding the old brain patterns that caused you to understand and to see differently. Reality works the same way. Conversion, or a change of heart, or spiritual evolution requires observation, first of all. We have to observe and to know ourselves, what we think, what we feel, how we behave, why we think what we think, why we feel what we feel, and why we behave the way that we behave. And then the second step then is to decide if we want to change our minds and our hearts, whether we're tired of the old perspective and willing to have a new one by rewriting the pattern of our brains. Over 2,000 years ago, there was a man named Yeshua. And I had a funny thing happen to me when I was writing this talk. I was using the microphone on my computer to actually type the words. And when I said Yeshua, it typed it as, yes, you are. I thought that was interesting. At any rate, Yeshua, or Jesus of Nazareth, who was very careful to observe his reality, both internally and externally, and he was able and willing to take the wisdom of his time and of his tradition, question it, and come to new conclusions if necessary. He was willing to take some of his Jewish tradition's most sacred beliefs and disagree with them. One of his great explorations had to do with God and the image of God. His tradition was steeped in very fearful images of God that we can still read in the Old Testament. Through his own exploration, however, he came to believe that God was a loving Father, Abba, with whom he could have an intimate relationship. And instead of relying on tradition and scripture, he was willing to look into his own mind and heart, to see and to hear what the living God was saying to him, and what that living God was desiring him to express in his life. And he saw that the Holy Book was not just an ancient text written on an inanimate piece of paper, but that he himself, in his very being, was a unique scripture, being written and full of innate wisdom. So rather than worshipping the God of his ancestors in a brick building, he came to realize that he himself was a temple of the living God, where he could have a relationship with this God, and where he could experience a relationship of mutual love and appreciation and acceptance. So while not an artist painting with oils or canvas, Yeshua was a great spiritual artist. Like Monet, he saw things with a rather unique perspective and hue. He too saw and spoke about the light in a way that was really different. He saw not only the ordinary light by which we see things around us, but he saw a second light, a deeper light, that penetrated and permeated all of reality, including his own being. And he boldly proclaimed that it was the light of the cosmos, a divine light that was present in every single person. The other day, there was a lady here for the Lifeline testing, and she and I got into a conversation. She asked if we had a book about the quantum field of light. She's been a metaphysician all her life, and now being elderly, her thoughts were turning to explore the issues of death and what happens physically. She particularly wanted to know about how the light of our bodies is transformed in the death process. And she wanted to know what quantum theory had to say about it. She already knew about electrons having half-lives and wondering how they would continue after death. And I wasn't able to recommend any book about her specific question, but I was able to share about my own experience of the light from my own perspective. And what I shared with her, basically, is that the light is the radiance of divine love. And Advent is a brief period of time which encapsulates everything that we're talking about. It is a representation of our whole life played out in a few weeks. It takes place when so many of our older traditions have important or significant high holy days. Hanukkah is celebrated by the Jewish people, celebrating the provision of enough oil for the lamps to be able to burn for 8 days continuously, even though the oil that burned for 8 days was contained in a flask that could only contain enough oil for 1 day. Recently we had the festival of lights called Diwali, celebrated by the Sikh and Hindu community. And in the Celtic and pagan tradition, we have the winter solstice coming up on December 21st, which celebrates the feast of the invincible sun. Now imagine if you were to go back in time and think of ourselves relying on nature to give us information about life and its meaning, we would be very concerned that the light seemed to be dying, dimming, and perhaps extinguishing in these winter months in the northern hemisphere. Without the sun, there wouldn't be life, because the sun is needed for the crops to grow, for the grasses to grow. If they don't grow, the animals won't survive. There won't be food or fodder for them. And so the animals, the plants, and humans would face extinction. And so that ancient and primitive fear was calmed around the winter solstice, when once again it became apparent that the sun's light and warmth was returning and growing with each new day. The sun was not going to go out. Yes, we're going to live. We can look at that collective fear and see how it becomes personal for each one of us. Every time we have the experience of a friend dying, or a member of our community dies, we're left to ponder the meaning of life and death, and whether we will survive, and if so, how, when, and where. Wayne Lewis, one of our members, passed on Wednesday after a rather nasty experience with cancer. And we know how wonderful and spiritual a man he was, and we wonder why he suffered the way he did, or at least I do. You see, we are all on the same journey, with the same questions being asked and the same answers to ponder. Whether we're an ancient Celtic druid or a Wiccan believer watching nature for signs of life's invincibility, a Sikh or a Hindu celebrating a moment of historical freedom by lighting lights, or whether we're a Jewish person lighting the 8 candles on the menorah, remembering the restoration of their ability to practice their faith, or whether we're a New Thought metaphysical Christian, like us in Unity, lighting the candles on our Advent wreath, we do so with the same curiosity and exploration of the light that we are. Yes, we are the light. Jesus told us that we are the universal light. You are the light of the cosmos. As Marianne Williamson once wrote so profoundly, it is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. There's a very profound need and reason why we are invited each Advent to contemplate our relationship with the light, because it is truly who we are. and each one of us is a candle meant to melt the darkness. And the light represents the love that we are, the love that melts the hate and the ignorance in the world around us. Like Yeshua, we must make the journey through the dark and find our way into our own experience of ourselves as being the light. Not just relying on what someone else has told us or what some book says. The light and the candles on our reed represents our identity. I want to share with you a story from a wonderful book, My Grandfather's Blessings, by Rachel Naomi Remen. And it's a story about a retreat that was being held for medical personnel. They were doing an exercise, and she says, Marie reached under her chair for the object she had put aside. After a few moments, she told us we could open our eyes, and we saw she held and placed a slender white candle in a tall candlestick in the center of her part of the sand tray. It was unlit. Just showing it to us obviously had a deep emotional significance for her. I offered her a box of matches, and she sat holding them for a long time, unable to light the candle or even talk about it. Finally, she lit it, saying in a very audible voice that it represented her real self. It was a touching and surprisingly intimate moment, especially powerful as the candle bore a striking resemblance to her own form. One at a time, others also shared their work, and then the woman seated next to Marie at the table began to speak. She too had an unlit candle in her tray. She told us that it represented her dream of being a professional and working with an open heart. And as she spoke, instead of lighting her candle with the matches, she picked it up, reached across, and lit it from the flame of Marie's candle. Marie burst into tears. The other woman, a sophisticated psychiatrist, began to apologize, saying that she had no idea why she had not used the matches and had not meant to invade her space. Oh no, Marie said to her. It's that there's so much cynicism and judgment among us that I never show anyone at work what really matters to me. Only my patients know. I am afraid that fellow professionals will laugh or that they will think less of me, and so I hide myself. For me, this work is holy, it's my calling. When you lit your candle from mine, I saw why it might be important to stop hiding. Perhaps I can find the courage to be who I really am. Perhaps there are others like you who are hiding too. There was a moment of silence, and then the two women reached out and embraced each other. I can talk all the day long about us being the light, about the reality of this spiritual energy, the light. But unless we allow the wick of our being to be lit by the power of God, unless we allow ourselves to catch the fire of God's love, we will not fulfill our potential or our purpose in being here. So I encourage us all to allow the presence of God to have its way with us so that we may catch fire and be a light in the world, that we may stop hiding in the darkness. God knows the world really needs us to show up and to be radiant.